This is me. Do you know who I am? The Lonely Scarecrow. My story started one spring morning on a farm. I wasn't even made then. Barbara and Frank were visiting their grandfather for a few days and watching him plant corn. Just as he was coming for more seed to plant, Frank and Barbara began to shout about crows in the field. What a nuisance crows can be. They do love to eat corn. They can pluck the kernels right out of the ground about as fast as a farmer can plant them. Well, they chased those pesky birds away before they could do much damage. But Grandfather remembered when he was of age, he had made a man out of straw and old clothes to scare the crows. A scarecrow. Yes, Frank and Barbara both had read about how farmers used to make scarecrows to protect their fields. And that's how I got started. Back at the barn, they got together all the things they'd need to build me. Frank brought some good straw. That would be my insides. Then Grandpa nailed together something to hold up my outsides. A wooden frame. They made me a happy face. They put Grandpa's old shirt and overalls on the frame and stuffed them with straw. They filled me up nice and round and put me all together. And then I was finished. Wasn't I handsome? All I needed now was a hat. There. Well, there I stood, all set to watch over the field. Frank spotted the crows. They didn't like having me around one bit. I could tell that from their cawing. They weren't sure what I was, but they'd find out before too long. I'd be protecting that field until the corn sprouted and grew and ripened. I could tell that Frank and Barbara were kind of sad to leave me. They thought I'd be lonely out there. The next day, Grandpa took Frank and Barbara home. They'd be back in a few months. I was glad they stopped to say goodbye to me. I was going to miss them. I watched them go, and I was sad, too. But I knew my job would keep me busy watching. And it was an important job, too. Yes, sir. Well, at the start, I was a little lonely. There didn't seem to be anyone around. But then I started looking carefully. The trees in the woodlot were putting on their green spring finery. In some spots, there were beautifully colored wildflowers. Then, one day, I saw something moving. Over there, under the trees. A skunk. She seemed very busy searching for food after her long winter sleep. Those first days that I was alone, I spotted a raccoon and an opossum, too. And close by, in another tree, there was a deer mouse, kind of quiet and shy. You know how some folks are. So even though I didn't have any visitors, I wasn't really alone out there in the cornfield. I watched a busy squirrel that lived in the woodlot. He seemed to be minding everybody's business. Then he'd run and scamper and chatter away. The birds were too busy building their nests or warming their eggs to pay any attention to squirrel nonsense. And sometimes those birds would sing. But there was one bird call I didn't take to. I sure didn't like the cawing of those pesky crows. They hadn't forgotten the sweet corn seeds. So finally they got brave enough to come down to the field, hoping I wouldn't see them. But I saw them and I scared them the only way I could, by flapping my arms. That sent them packing for home every time. My flapping kept them flying out of the cornfield I had to protect. At the edge of the field, I had more pleasant bird neighbors, a family of bobolinks that had made their home in the tall grass. Yes, sir, I had lots of neighbors out there. Of course, you had to look sharp to see some of them, like the nervous little gophers and the frisky field mouse. And almost right under my feet, I had other neighbors that lived mostly underground, the ants that were forever running from their nest, and an earthworm that churned up the soil. Lonely? Me? I should say not. Not with so much company living nearby. And as the spring days grew warmer and longer, the young corn sprouts began to push up out of the ground and stripe the field with green. I could see that they were good, strong plants, and I was proud that I'd protected them from the pesky crows. Those corn plants weren't the only young things around either. Why, out in the woodlot, Mrs. Possum was toting her brood of young'uns around. And Mrs. Raccoon was teaching her offspring how to search for food. So was Mrs. Skunk. In her nest in the long grass, Mother Bobolink was feeding her soft, downy fledglings. A mother rabbit had moved into the short grass where she'd made a nest for her babies. It was one of her babies that gave me the scare of my life. It didn't happen in the spring, but later, in the summer, when the corn plants had grown big and tall, almost up to my shoulders. On one plant, a spider had strung the silvery threads of its web to catch insects the spider ate. Most times, the spider didn't have long to wait. My field was swarming with insects. I couldn't tell you how many kinds there were. Flying insects, hopping insects, and walking insects. One thing I do know, birds living in the woodlot came on many a visit to find and eat those insects like they were some delicious treat. But I noticed that there was one bird, a hawk, who would settle for insects only if there was nothing better. Just the sight of him hovering there, scouting for his dinner, sent a lot of my neighbors running for cover. It looked to me like the hawk wasn't going to find a big dinner today. Or was he? Because I looked down and, oh, there was one of the young rabbits that lived at the edge of the field. She was too busy eating to see the hawk, but he saw her all right. He wasn't scared of me, but maybe if I flapped my arms, he'd take his sharp eyes off her for just a second. He did, and that second was all the rabbit needed to scamper away between the tall corn plants. Well, this was one time he wouldn't have rabbit for supper. But I hoped the little rabbit had learned a good lesson. And that was the day Barbara and Frank came back to visit their grandfather's farm. They pushed their way through the tall corn to see me, They hadn't seen me since spring, and I was sure glad to see them again. Grandpa didn't have to tell them what a good job I had done protecting the cornfield. They could see. Frank and Barbara were real proud of me. Yet they kept thinking that I had led a very lonely life. But you and I know that I hadn't. Maybe you could tell them why. You could write a story or draw pictures of the many animals that were my neighbors. Could you do that? That would make me a very happy scarecrow.